Hello, folks. Thank you for joining us virtually today. Scott Guile here from McMillan. I am thrilled to have, we maxed out on registration for this, and we have a very robust number. So you are all on mute because of the ambient noise, and I want to just review what you should be seeing on your screen in terms of GoToWebinar. Next slide, please. So you should see in the right corner of your screen this bar with the orange arrow on it and these other icons. And I know there's a lot on this slide, but if you take a look here, if you want to pop out any of those things like the question panel or the audio or whatever, if you click that little square, it pops it out in the middle of your screen so you can work with it. That orange arrow pops out all the tools so they're bigger and then minimizes them so they don't get in the way of your screen. Where it says questions, this is where we want you to interact with us. You can ask questions at any point in time. We will answer them back to you in chat or in questions. We will also read them to the group if they pertain to the group. Lastly, you can toggle sort of screen views with that, that icon. I don't even know how to describe it. Next slide, please. Lastly, in the bottom, in your tray, the bottom of your computer, you should see like this blue looking flower thing. That's the webinar. If you click on that, it minimizes it. If you click on it, it unminimizes it. It doesn't end it, but you can play around with the view of it like that. But if it does disappear, if you click that blue flower, it should pop back up. So hopefully that was helpful. On to the business of the day. Next slide, please. So Selena is wonderful. I'm going to assume that you guys can all read. I'm not going to read this slide to you. I'm going to tell you a little story. I first met Selena in 2004. I was the economics marketing manager. We had just published a book by Paul Krugman. And we signed a contract with a company called Applia. Applia was one of the first student technologies available. Economists embraced this concept, and she's an economist, very early. It helped that Applia was done by a guy named Paul Romer, who subsequently won a Nobel Prize. So it had some weight behind it. But as a result of this, economists have been using these kind of tools for almost 2 decades. And Selena was one of the early folks in that. And that is how I met Selena. And she's a wonderful instructor, a wonderful presenter. She's done great work for us. One of the best things about Selena, she uses the kind of technology that most people wouldn't, she's using the stuff that's like on the leading edge a lot of the times, but also using the stuff that works. But she's also able to tell us what she thinks her colleagues need. She's sort of been like a whisperer for us in terms of how to build things for wide use for what people need to do in their classrooms, not just people like her. Next slide, please. So I just want to level set here because we had started promoting this webinar 4 weeks ago. Initially, we wanted to talk a bit about Achieve. It's our new platform, very proud of it. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful solution for everyone on this call, but right now it doesn't pertain to everyone. The Achieve part is going to be at the end. The majority of this is going to have Selena share strategies about teaching online because she is so good at it and has been doing it for so long. It seemed like an opportunity we could not squander to have Selena share this and sort of have the Achieve stuff be at the end. There will be a QA afterwards. Again, you can chat anytime and we will answer as you chat in, but there will be a dedicated QA at the end as well. One brief note, we've had some of these crash this week. This is not our software. This is a software called GoToWebinar. So far, this one seems very stable. If that does happen, we will send you the recording. Enough from me. Selena, please take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, Scott, for that wonderful intro and for making me feel old. I hope that you are all dealing with these challenges. I hope your families are all well and safe, first and foremost. I hope that you're finding perspective and levity when you can. This is something we're all getting through together. I think I'm told that there's an old curse that says something like, may you live in interesting times. So let's get through this together, and hopefully we can learn from each other. I think we've seen an unprecedented amount of teachers helping teachers, which inspires me and makes me feel a little bit better about our profession. But let's get started. So thank you all for spending some time. I know time is valuable. And so thank you for spending time with us here. I'm hoping to help us think about addressing modern teaching challenges, not just in the current sort of COVID-19 crisis, but maybe even broader. Sort of things are moving in education, as we know, sort of larger classes, different modalities, and that can be tricky, right? That requires a lot of us. And this is a photo of me a few months ago. Notice I started social distancing before it was a thing, out in Northern California somewhere. So I will talk a little bit about going online in a hurry, because we're all sort of climbing those boulders right now, but also just kind of more broadly what works in different modalities, so that we don't end up reinventing the wheel, and we don't end up doing something like adopting something that's only going to work for this term and we'll never use it again. So there's some of my contact info. Please reach out if you have any questions or would like to share or commiserate. So I would like to talk a little bit about going online in a hurry. Like I said, mostly I'll be giving you resources here, because a lot of people have written a lot of good things, and so I don't want to rehash all of that. But like I said, most importantly, thinking about what are the best practices that work for all modalities. And then at the end, like Scott said, some question and answer. And there's a little serene view for you in case you need to be finding a happy place right now. So let's see if this link works. Going online in a hurry. So this is a stressful thing. This is a stressful thing for me, probably for you. Some level setting is amazing. We'll see if this comes through. This is a clip about from The Daily Show. And probably you're not going to be able to hear it. I'm just realizing. So what he's going to say, I'll just sort of talk us through it and we'll move on. So Trevor Noah is talking about the reality of being on an airplane and what happens when you hit turbulence. It's so much nicer if the pilot ahead of time has said, hey, heads up, we're going to hit some turbulence, rather than you hit it and the pilot comes on the loudspeaker and says, oh, nothing's wrong. And clearly things are wrong. So the point of all this is the leadership of our instructors, of us to our students, and maybe even our colleagues in this time is pretty crucial, right? Some of us are flying pretty blind, but the students are flying perhaps even more blind. My son's girlfriend is reported she's taking a wine appreciation class in her last semester at college, and she is having more busy work thrust on her now that this wine appreciation class is going online. I'm not exactly sure how you appreciate wine online, but she's spending more time on this class than almost any other class. And the fact of the matter is, like, the leadership of the instructors, maybe we're doing it for the first time and things are crashing down around our ears. Letting the students in on the fact that we're all in this together is, I think, crucial, and I think helpful so much for students. Students are going through a lot right now as well, and to have sort of not be in the loop for what's going on, or not have their instructors be real with them is kind of a big deal. So that's just maybe a vote from me, and a reminder to myself as well to be really transparent with students, and even more so than with students, with ourselves, right? The idea of a perfect class probably should be tempered, right? And the reality is that is not taking seriously the art and craft of teaching, especially moving things online. It's not just throwing a bunch of PowerPoints up and calling it good. So expectations and reality. Let's be kind with ourselves. I found this on Twitter 2 days ago, and I thought I'm going to keep coming back to it. It's just something that I think will be helpful. This is the reality, right? So if you have never seen this, BBC guy maybe you're lecturing on Zoom at home, maybe you're not, maybe you're doing things asynchronously, but this is just part of what happens to this poor guy as he's live on air with BBC. His daughter marches in rather, busts the door open. Then after this, the toddler the baby, the younger sibling comes in a little wheelie walker, and then the poor wife, who's been in the bathroom, rounds the corner with her pants half down, and everything has just fallen to pieces. But the reality is that's going to happen, and let's try to have people with their pants up, but let's also lock the door, right? This is kind of on him for not locking the door. Definitely, I've had dogs barking, things crash down to the ground when I'm sort of doing these videotapes, and actually the students are fine with it. It humanizes us in a way that doesn't always happen in the classroom. One of my particular challenges, this little robot over here, is how I sound in a lot of my videos for my students. Without actual students there, it's really hard to have an animated voice. And so I ran across an accounting colleague of mine who lives around the corner, and he's like, I don't know how I'm going to go online. I'm so used to getting energy and juice from the students. I don't know how I'm going to do it. So I suggested maybe recording his lectures with 3 or 4 students in the Zoom room and interacting that way. Maybe have a little bit of interaction, not so much that it's overwhelming, but enough to sort of feed that engagement on both sides of the camera. So here are some promised quick resources. I'll have a slide at the end with all of the resources, and maybe we'll put them up in the chat window as well. The Chronicle of Higher Ed has a nice sort of map for how to go online in a hurry. Stanford has a whole set of Google Docs, which does a really nice job sort of, if you haven't already made this decision, should I go synchronous, asynchronous? What kind of stuff is better? What are the pros and cons? So they've done some work there. So those are all accessible. Before I do anything else, a tiny bit of sort of keys here. I think we want to humanize, we want to pivot, rethink high stakes assessment, right? Midterms moving online, that's difficult stuff, right? Are we going to monitor them? Are we going to change? Are we going to just not do multiple choice anymore? A reminder, less is sometimes more. So we want to think about how we do it. And of course, lectures. Should we be lecturing the same way that we always did? So let me move on quickly from that and just give you a few things. I'm redesigning my course right now. I'm just starting spring quarter. We're in the quarter system. Some things I'm thinking of doing, and maybe you have other ideas, but changing the format of what students are giving me, right? So maybe video essays, maybe more of them personalizing. They don't have community right now with other students. So thinking about how to do that. Humanizing, bringing pets in. Maybe affinity groups, people that like dogs are part of a small group, people that like camping or another part of a small group where they can have their own discussion board within the class. So we need flexibility, right? We need flexibility in lots of ways. Modality flexibility. We need to be responding to the world as it's changing day by day. Worth remembering, we are not the same as our students. Our students are probably not younger versions of ourselves. Academics are famously good at learning, interested in specific types of learning, and our students may be super thrilled about physics or animals, but they're taking my econ class. So thinking about what worked for us doesn't always help us be good teachers. So students, getting to know students, and maybe your students are like this, maybe they're different than this, but most of the students in Generation Z that we're teaching right now have some amount of, share some of these characteristics. They're comfortable with program material. They don't read the text. They're tech savvy, but to a point, because the tech that they know, they use a lot of, is really user friendly. So they don't know the back end so much. So when things go wrong, they often don't know what to do. So we need to rely on simple things. Multitasking is a way of life. Autonomy, their study skills, especially if we're teaching intro level courses, they are still developing for these young people. They like and need practice questions to let them know if they're learning, and that's a good thing. And they may be overpraised and prone to thinking, they're naturally gifted at math, or they're just not a math person, which is pretty harmful to their learning. So us, them, there's a big divide. The disconnect for most of our students is probably there between us and our students. How do we bridge that? Let's think about how learning works, right? Let's lean on the experts. So this is a book that I have been using for years now. Our learning committee for our university that teaches faculty, instructs them in a year-long learning community about best practices, settled on this book as the way to do it. So I co-led this for 3 or 4 years, and it was the best one that we could find. So I highly recommend it. It's got all the research, and it has a lot of application and summary. So in short, are there strategies that we should be using in the pandemic world, but also just in whatever modalities, assuming that we get beyond this someday? Yeah, I'm always going to push for active learning. The learning science pushes for it. We, over and over in most disciplines, see that this is the way to go. What does active learning mean? No doubt you've heard some sort of description of it. You probably have something in mind about it, but it is basically moving away from the sage on the stage model. This idea that learning consists of us emptying our super full buckets of knowledge into receptive empty buckets on the student side. Not really what learning science has been teaching us about how it works. For a little aside, we all can think about 14th century transportation versus 21st century transportation. And as the science has progressed and as we've learned more about physics and the laws of motion, we have gotten much more powerful and effective modes of transportation and education. There's a 14th century classroom on the left and a 21st century classroom on the right, and it doesn't look markedly different, except a little bit of technology helping the lecture get faster to people, but it's still the same model. So what's wrong with this? There's nothing wrong with it. Is it the best possible case? No. And so for moving a modality, let's think about what's most appropriate. I advocate for backward design, and I've got a sort of a guide here. This is a miniature guide, and then there's actually worksheets that you can use. Vanderbilt University and Carnegie Mellon University have some wonderful sets of resources here. But the basic idea is, hey, this is an opportunity here for us to rethink what it is we want our students to know, and back into it. What do they need to know? How will we know that they know it? And then we design the content and the assessment around it. So although it feels like more work to do it this way than to sort of just follow the chapter leads in the textbook, which often are a good place to start, but the things may be changing, and that actually may be too much for what you're trying to do. And I'm always going to say, if you're putting your stuff online right now, think about prioritizing. What are the topics you most want to cover? Because you might not get to all of them, right? Even in good times, we have a hard time getting to everything we want to get to. So backward design. A couple of keys from this How Learning Works book that I think might be able to help us and think about, especially with technology. Students bring prior knowledge in, and that can either help or hinder, right? They have a working knowledge, all humans do, of how the world works. For economics, that's particularly challenging because they have learned a probably politically colored and perhaps even morally colored view of the world that may or may not jive with what the science knows. So how do you bring that up, highlight these things, and deal with them? Either say, yes, that is what our science says about how the world works. Your preconception is right, or it's wrong. Let's think about why it's wrong, and let's sort of bring it down. Preconceptions quizzes are a wonderful thing. Some disciplines have this. Your discipline may already have worked on this. But if you've been teaching long enough, you probably know what some of the misconceptions or preconceptions are. And so thinking about 5 or 10 or 15 questions you could ask, either online if you're teaching online, or when you go back to face-to-face, do it face-to-face in some paper quizzes or some clicker quizzes or whatever it is. It really doesn't matter the modality. It's the sort of the highlighting the questions. Mastery. We know none of us are born knowing how to walk. At least I don't think so. Perhaps, present company excluded, perhaps. Or dance or play the violin or anything else, right? It requires practice. And the brain is perhaps the laziest part of our body. It doesn't like to do extra work. So students will sit through a lecture and go, yeah, I got it. Why did I do so poorly on the exam? I understood it in lecture. It's because they didn't really have the deep knowledge. They didn't practice it. So how do you push them? How do you nudge them into mastery? Give them lots of low stakes assignments. They like practicing. Well, they don't like practicing, but if they have to do it for a grade, they will like it. So low stakes practice questions. Low stakes meaning not worth most of their grade, right? So that if they fail, they're not afraid to fail if it's not going to hurt their grade too much. And this is where I use the low stakes plentiful practice, which we know reduces stress and improves effort. I like to use iClicker when I'm using face-to-face classes. And now I notice iClicker is making itself available for remote use as well for the rest of the COVID-19 crisis at no cost, I believe. So you can look into that with your sales rep. But we have, iClicker is one of the oldest, most foolproof of the polling. They have an app and they also have handheld remotes. So I like to use it. I've been using it for a super long time. And I can, have preloaded questions, or I can just push the question of the day. I never write questions into iClicker. I just always sort of whatever's coming up. I do my preconception quizzes, this way as well. The best feedback is goal-directed and targeted. Some of us, I'm coming up on a class that has 200. So I'm never going to be able to give them all great feedback, but good feedback should be as unique as possible. So sometimes this can be achieved with peer instruction. As students are working with each other, they can sort of capture some of that. In large classes, that's what I like to do, is have students answer a question, not tell them if it's right, and then have them discuss amongst themselves. Sometimes they can get good feedback from their peers. And by the way, they pay attention to their peers a lot more than they pay attention to me. Now more than ever, we have this course, the issue of climate, right? Their learning interacts with everything. Students that feel like they're on the outside, like they don't look like everybody else, they're maybe the only one that hasn't been to college, whose families haven't been to college. Perhaps they're a female in a class where all of the textbook examples are male dominated. These things all affect learning and will hinder learning. So in the social, emotional, intellectual climate, whether or not we think that it's our job to care for this part of the students, it is by definition going to affect their ability to learn, so it comes into their learning. So whether or not we want to admit it or deal with it, it's part of the success or failure of our students. And so thinking about how to do that, especially now where we don't know where students are doing their learning, how much access they have to computer time, whether or not somebody in their family's just lost a job or has become ill, these things matter. So you might think about that as you're thinking about structuring your classes. So technology, I think in a lot of these ways can help ease the burden a little bit. Something that whether or not I do synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid, fully face-to-face, fully online, I'm going to start adopting this more than I have been. And that's just a quick little video at the beginning of each week saying like, okay, here's what we're doing. Or at the end of each week, here's what we did this week, contextualizing, summarizing, putting a wrapper on it for students. And because I don't think they do that enough for themselves, but also it just humanizes. So if you have pets at home, I happen to have been raising baby chickens at some point for my parents. So I was trying to get the chicken to look at the camera, and, believe it or not, chickens don't listen. So that never happened, but it was funny for students to watch. I forgot I made this video. They still talk about it today. All right. So something like that, even just a 1-minute video of you playing your guitar for, and then telling them what's on tap for the week. Low production value. Students love it. I do think also it helps everybody to see the learning path. So we have students and instructors knowing how learning works. Let's teach each other, right? Let's show them, because if they figure out how learning works a little bit more than they did before your class, it's going to help them for the rest of their lives. I'll skip through this because I have more examples at the end if anyone's interested, but maybe put a few things on your syllabus. Assessment is an important and powerful thing. Do more of it. Help them to see, I'm going to skip this. This is just me, pardon me, talking about how I visualize with my students what they do outside of class versus in class, or what they do in the lecture, what the lecture is for versus what the pre-lecture work on their side is for. Yeah, I like to, just because I'm using iPads doesn't mean that I'm not basically being low tech and cutting and pasting shapes and making little stick figures. But that idea of you showing how you think, or contextualizing for them, so they don't get stuck in the weeds of just like terminology and mathematical tools and all these things that they tend to think are the same as your discipline, when we know those are just tools to get us to be able to work in the theories and the models of our discipline. Think about using your time with students more for that higher level stuff. Just because we're in high tech doesn't mean we can't still do chalk and talk. I have instructors that, this is me with an iPad. This is one of my explainer videos. Pretty low key, right? But I have instructors that just point the phone at their hands, tape for 5 minutes, their hands writing on a piece of paper. That's legit. Students love that as well. And then, as Scott said, for the last few minutes, talking about Achieve. Now, you may or may not have used Achieve, or it may not be yet available for your discipline. But there's something, the things that I like about Achieve, the biggest thing is that it aligns well with some of the stuff I just talked about, right? How learning works, giving students low, plentiful practice, and then building on that. So in the model of Achieve, they watch a lot of these little already made videos that are nicely produced and have a female narrator, and don't sort of, they're pretty inclusive. So they do that, and then I can also make my own videos to add on if I'm covering things that aren't in the textbook. Then we get into, before they ever do a lecture with me, they have to watch these videos and answer some questions. Now, if I'm in class or if they're online, they do this little formative assessment. If they're in class, they actually do peer instruction with each other, so they talk to each other. Some quarters I've done these paper feedback forms. They're called if-at forms. Most of the time I use the iClicker, or the Reef app is what you're seeing. Then from that, I get to see where their continued misperceptions are, where the problems are. And I give my brilliant commentary, and all the problems are solved. I wish. But I can sort of deal with the problems as they come up, rather than wasting everybody's time by lecturing over things that the book has already done. Pardon me. And then together we can go into more interesting territory, applications, current events. I think this time in our history, we want to do that. We want to do current events, right? I'm sure your discipline has so much to say about what's going on in the world. So I want to clear space for that.
I'm gonna just jump in for a second on the Achieve.
Yeah.
Key. Thank you. This has been wonderful so far, by the way. It always is with you. Achieve is a compilation of resources that we often have in our other products. Right now, it's available for Principles of Economics, Calculus, Intro Biology, several English classes, mostly composition, but also developmental English. Feel like I'm missing something. Introduction to Gen Chem. Eventually, this is the future for us. but it does not apply to everyone. However, a lot of these tools Selena is talking about are available in various products from Macmillan, and we are always available to show you how to implement them best. So just wanted to clear that up, where this is available and what we're talking about here. And I don't want to spend too much more time on it because I want to get to QA. Sorry.
Great.
Continue, Selena.
No, thank you. Thank you. That was good. Just a few screenshots of what I get. I get feedback for my large classes. This helps. I get feedback on sort of where the problems are in the questions that they're given before they come to my lecture. One of my favorite things of all times is this: they've got to justify their questions, and they're not right or wrong, but I get to see, like, if people answered it incorrectly, I can sort of filter through and say, all right, all the people that got it incorrect, what were they thinking? So this is that preconceptions, and which can be pretty stubborn to unseat, honestly. I can see into their thinking a little bit more. And then I go into more in-depth stuff, either technically in-depth or current event in-depth. But that's basically it. I want to just reiterate that as much as we talk about tools, especially right now, focused on tools, the key ingredient for how tasty any meal is not the perfection of the recipe or the quality of the ingredients, although those matter. It is you. So make sure you're choosing things that fit with your personality and keep you motivated and engaged in these very challenging times. And again, let's get through this together, and let's hope our families stay well and healthy and positive. So thank you so much for your time, and I think it's time for question and answer now.
Yes, and as it turns out, we've already got some good ones in the question that I think are well worthy of reading aloud. The first, I'm going to go in the order they came to me. I think there's only a fair way to do it. One person asked, will we cover a way to have group discussions in online classes? And you touched on it. I don't know that you, this person probably wants a specific or two, and I sense you probably might have a suggestion. So we'll begin with that one.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful question. Group discussions, probably if you've got your learning management system, your LMS, will have something like that. If that's enough for you, they can usually make it look like a blog if students are more used to that format. I think group discussions, that would be the first place I would stop and shop, would be your own LMS.
We embed it in a couple of too, by the way. We embed it in Launchpad.
What? Oh, in Launchpad as well? Okay, great. Yeah, and there are external tools.
Or that, or did you have another one if the LMS isn't an option?
Yeah, I am going to be using Flipgrids with my classes. We just transitioned to Canvas, and Flipgrids is a tool that's already embedded for us in Canvas, and that gives the ability to do video, quick video comments on each other. So I'm going to be using that just because I'm trying to get more a sense of community and see people's faces. But there are other tools as well.
In LMS, for those who are wondering what that acronym is, Canvas, Blackboard, Desire to Learn, your own school may have its own sort of white labeled version, but those are generally, it's the system that students, where you're posting grades often, things like that. Hopefully that makes sense to folks. Okay, next question, Selena. And again, I'm going in the order these came in. Can you describe the difference between synchronous and asynchronous? I answered this person, but I think you probably have a better answer than I do.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, so synchronous, in my understanding, is when you present an online class and everyone has to be there at the same time. The instructor and the students are all logged in at the same time. Maybe it's through Zoom, maybe it's through a discussion board, maybe it's somehow you're interacting sort of at a set class time. Asynchronous would be what I'm going to be doing this next quarter, which is posting things that the students can watch or interact with whenever they have time in their schedules. They all have the same due date, but they get to sort of interact and do discussion boards and other things when it's most convenient for them. So they do not have to be logged in at a specific time. Hope that answers the question.
I'll add a commentary here because I have 3 kids and I'm watching them adapt to this, right? The K through 12 folks are very locked into the idea that it needs to be synchronous, and they're trying to, stay on some sort of schedule a lot with these kids. And I think it's important to be flexible. If you're going to go online, there can be a synchronous part, but you can't try to structure a synchronous day. It's just too much to ask, kind of like the wine example you had given earlier, Selena. There could be check-ins that are synchronous, but I think a lot of the work needs to be asynchronous, sort of at the student's pace of, they can get it done at the pace they can get it done. That's enough for me. Let's get to the next question. If we are to assume the students haven't done the reading beforehand, how can we work on the conceptualization and application during class time? I actually have an answer for this. And Selena, I'll let you as well. We have a couple of tools. We have adaptive quizzing called Learning Curve. We have the tool that Selena was sharing in Achieve. It was initially called Smart Physics, and then Flip It. It is a videos that students are required to watch. So there's actually an accessible piece that you make it part of their grade. 10% of your grade is going to be doing this adaptive quiz or doing, watching these videos and answering these questions about it. And they do it. And then they come prepared. So there are tools that are easy to sort of implement to make sure that that doesn't happen, or that limits the amount that happens. And Selena, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's exactly right. The gold standard, I think, is to ask them questions to see if they're getting it. I have a lot of faculty currently that are interested in that same question. How do I make sure can I see their page views? And I always say, your LMS can show you how many clicks you've had on a topic or how much time they've spent on screen, but that's not going to tell you anything because students leave their windows open, or they know they can click and get credit. I think we don't know until we actually assess them on it. So I would agree with Scott.
Just a FYI, some very helpful gentleman has told us the Stanford link that you're using, I guess, has changed. I have copied and pasted the new Stanford link into the chat. We might want to fix that. Yeah, we'll fix that before sending out.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay, the link for the Stanford. What do you recommend for students who have challenges with computer and internet access? That's a tough one. I'm gonna let you try that one, Selena.
Well, that's something our university has been dealing with, and I honestly don't know the best answer to that. That's a tough one. What our university has done is made it available for students, if they don't have a laptop, to come and check one out for the remainder of the term until June. Beyond that, I do think what we need to do when we're designing the course, we need to figure that question out first. And I think maybe that's the first place to start. If you know that you have the possibility of students without access, then things need to change pretty radically. But I would be in contact with I don't know if that's what office that is at your university, but maybe even the DRC, the Disabled Student Resources, would have some extra equipment, or not that the student is necessarily disabled, but I'm just thinking of places where we have extra piles of computers or access or whatever. But yeah, and we can't rely on students. I know I have faculty that say this, like, well, students will let me know. They don't necessarily let us know. We need to go and ask them, because it's embarrassing, if you're a migrant farm worker family and you don't have access to it. You might be one of the only ones in your class, and you don't want to sort of out yourself that way. So I don't know the best answer to that, other than I would get with your deans and your department chairs and ask them to come up with a plan, because it's too much for us to do, I think, on our own.
Normally you would tell them to go to the library and things like that, and obviously that's the normal sort of initial advice. It doesn't apply, so it's a very difficult. I agree. We have a question about Flipgrid being ADA compatible, since it's not our stuff. Selena, do you have any idea? if it is?
That is a good question. I am working on that right now. I don't
Assuming
know.
if they put it in the
I don't.
LMS, it is, but it's dangerous to make
Yeah,
assumptions. I can
right.
speak to ADA compatibility. It's not nearly as easy as people think. It's a
Yeah,
huge effort and achieve to meet the highest standards of compatibility across the board, and it's no small amount of work. And we're not the only one. We're gonna get there. Achieve is there. Our other stuff is gotten, it's come a long way, but it definitely, it's something you should always check. And as a former special ed teacher, which I am, you can always give an alternative assignment if for whatever reason you found, that this thing's not compatible. I mean, that's a last resort, but it is something you can do if you need to. I believe that's the end of the questions. There were some comments, just, thank you for the advice, things like that. Someone suggested have students work offline and use cell phone to upload assignments through email. Certainly, right? Yeah, you can get a
yeah.
lot done on a phone. I know because my computer crashed 2 weeks ago and I was on a phone for a week. Did I get as much done as I normally do? No, but I could get stuff done. Mostly just coming in thank yous at this point, Selena, and I echo that. It's always a pleasure to work on something with you, and this is no different. So thank you, everyone. Slides will come out. We'll need to fix that link, please, Selena, before we send those out. And probably have another event not too far in the future. We have no idea what the next weeks and months are going to look like. Have a great day, all.
Thanks, everybody.